previous missing persons cases. Case 1, the disappearance of Connor and Sheila Dwyer. Connor and Sheila Dwyer seemed like any other couple from their small town in County Cork, Ireland. Connor, a friendly man with a light-hearted sense of humor, had worked various jobs, from being a cabbie to a handyman. Sheila was quiet and reserved, always dedicated to keeping their home spotless. By 1991, their 2 sons were grown and living in England, leaving Connor and Sheila to look forward to a peaceful retirement. But that spring, everything changed. On the morning of April 30th, 1991, they attended a funeral at a local church. No one noticed anything unusual about the Dwyers. They were seen briefly talking with neighbors before leaving. However, for several weeks afterward, none of their friends or family could reach them. First, it seemed they might have gone on one of their unannounced trips, but as time passed, worry set in. Sheila's sisters, Maisie and Nellie, eventually contacted the Irish police, who went to the Dwyer home. They found no signs of struggle or forced entry, and nothing seemed out of place, except that the Dwyers and their white Toyota Cressida were gone. Their passports were still in the house, along with $1,000 in cash. The mystery of their disappearance had just begun. The authorities launched an extensive search, but every lead came up empty. The Garda even combed through rivers, including the murky Blackwater River, but found no clues. Rumors spread. Some claimed Connor and Sheila had staged their own disappearance. Others suspected foul play. And then, in 1993, a woman named Mary O'Dowd reported an odd encounter at an airport in France. She described the couple she believed to be the Dwyers, looking tense and attempting to stay unnoticed. Investigators pursued her tip, but ultimately nothing came of it. Over time, other theories emerged, including the possibility that Connor had been involved in some dangerous dealings, or that they had met the same fate as a local man, Billy Fennessy, whose body had been found years after he disappeared. Despite all the speculation, Connor and Sheila's case remains open, unsolved, and hauntingly unresolved. Case 2, Peter Falconio and Joanne Lee's terrifying encounter. Peter Falconio and Joanne Lees were a young couple from Brighton, England, who loved adventure. In 2001, they set out on a journey that would take them across Australia's wild landscapes. They had driven across cities and countryside, finally hitting Stewart Highway, a remote road stretching through the Australian outback. On the evening of July 14th, Peter and Joanne were driving north when a white SUV began following them. At first, Peter assumed the vehicle would pass, but instead the driver flagged them down. Pulling over, Peter met with the man, who pointed out an apparent problem with their engine's exhaust. But before Peter could investigate, Joanne heard a loud blast. The driver suddenly appeared at her window, pointing a silver revolver at her. She was handcuffed and dragged to the man's vehicle, but with quick thinking, she managed to escape through the back and hide in the bushes, watching the stranger as he searched for her. Hours later, Joanne flagged down a truck driver who took her to a nearby roadhouse, where she called the police. The crime scene was empty except for a pool of blood near where their van had been parked. The van itself had been moved hundreds of feet off the road, though authorities acted quickly, setting up roadblocks and interviewing witnesses. The trail soon went cold, and Peter was nowhere to be found. Joanne's account initially drew sympathy, but as time wore on, public doubt grew. The media scrutinized her story, comparing it to another famous Australian case, that of Lindy Chamberlain, whose claim that a dingo had taken her child had made her a target of public suspicion. Joanne's refusal to give multiple interviews only fueled speculation. But despite the mounting public skepticism, police found one piece of evidence that kept them focused on her story: a single blood stain on her shirt that didn't match Peter's or hers. The investigation eventually led police to Bradley John Murdoch, a known criminal with a history of drug smuggling and violence. DNA evidence matched Murdoch to the blood found on Joanne's shirt, and in 2005, he was convicted of Peter's murder. However, Murdoch never admitted to the crime or revealed where Peter's body could be found. To this day, Peter Falconio's remains have never been recovered. Case 3, The Mystery of Lars Mittank. In July 2014, 28-year-old Lars Mittank traveled from his home in Germany to Varna, a beach town in Bulgaria, for a vacation with friends. By all accounts, Lars was an average guy, quiet, friendly, and a loyal friend. But after a few days of carefree beach time, Lars got into a minor scuffle over a soccer rivalry. Though he he sustained a ruptured eardrum, the injury seemed manageable, and Lars planned to fly home as scheduled. A doctor advised him not to fly right away due to the risk of pressure damage to his ear, prescribing antibiotics and suggesting he wait a day. His friends, whose flights were on schedule, left as planned while Lars stayed behind. At first, he seemed fine spending the night in a nearby hotel, but as the hours went on, Lars began to act strangely, texting his mother that he felt unsafe and since people were following him. At one point, he left his hotel and vanished into the night for hours, only to return early the next morning, visibly anxious. When he went to the airport to attempt his flight home the following day, his paranoia spiked. Surveillance footage at the airport shows Lars arriving and moving nervously through the terminal, looking over his shoulder as if being pursued. Moments later, Lars is seen bolting through the airport, abandoning his luggage, and running outside. He sprinted across the parking lot, scaled a fence, and disappeared into a field of sunflowers that borders the airport. Despite extensive searches, Lars was never seen again. Lars's disappearance has baffled investigators and his family alike. Some suspect he may have had a psychological episode brought on by the medication or stress, while others think he may have run afoul of something more sinister during his travels. No evidence has surfaced, and Lars's fate remains one of the most perplexing cases in Europe. Case 4. The vanishing of Brandon Swanson. In May 2008, 19-year-old Brandon Swanson of Marshall, Minnesota, was celebrating the end of the spring semester with friends when he accidentally drove his car into a ditch on a rural road late at night. Stranded, he called his parents to come pick him up, calmly explaining that he thought he was near the town of Lind, only a short drive from their home. As his parents drove to find him, they spoke to Brandon over the phone, trying to follow his directions. But as they neared the location he described, they couldn't find him, and Brandon couldn't see any familiar landmarks. Growing increasingly frustrated, he began walking, certain he'd eventually find a recognizable spot or meet his parents. But the call took a chilling turn when Brandon suddenly exclaimed, "Oh shit," before the line went dead. Frantic, his parents tried calling back repeatedly, but there was no answer. Local authorities launched an exhaustive search, combing the area and even draining nearby bodies of water. While Brandon's car was eventually found, there was no trace of him or any clues as to what he might have seen that night. Theories range from an accidental fall to an encounter with someone on the deserted road. Despite ongoing searches and years of investigation, Brandon Swanson remains missing. Case 5. The bizarre disappearance of Maura Murray. On a cold night in February 2004, Maura Murray, a 21-year-old nursing student from Massachusetts, emailed her professors, telling them she'd be away for a family emergency. She packed up her car and drove north, seemingly without telling anyone where she was going or why. Just hours later, her car veered off a rural road in New Hampshire, crashing into a snowbank. A passing motorist stopped and asked Maura if she needed help, but she politely declined, saying she'd already called for roadside assistance. Moments later, another driver noticed her car but saw no sign of Maura herself. By the time police arrived, Maura had vanished, leaving behind her car some belongings, and an air of mystery that's haunted investigators for years. Despite countless searches and even appeals from Maura's family, no substantial clues have ever explained why she left, where she went, or what may have happened to her after the crash. Some speculate she left to start a new life, while others believe she may have encountered foul play in the remote, freezing woods of New Hampshire. To this day, her case remains unsolved, an enduring enigma in true crime circles. Case 6. The vanished family of Jim and Deborah Gibson. In April 2001, Jim Gibson, his wife Deborah, and their 2 children vanished from their home in Springfield, Missouri. Friends and neighbors hadn't seen them for days and found it unusual, as the Gibsons were a social, close-knit family. A welfare check by police found the house in seemingly perfect order, the family's beds neatly made, and the kitchen spotless. But the family car was gone, along with Jim, Deborah, and the kids. Months passed without a word, and as the investigation progressed, a disturbing picture began to emerge. It was discovered that Jim had been involved in a business that was reportedly tied to criminal organizations. While authorities initially considered a staged disappearance, they found no trace of the family in any known records, and no family members or close friends reported any contact with them. revealed the fate of the Gibson family. Some suspect they are alive, living under new identities, while others fear they met a far darker end. With every passing year, the Gibson's disappearance becomes one more eerie chapter in the book of unsolved missing persons, cases,